The silk thread snapped between my fingers, and I knew, right then, watching it curl and fall to the dusty basement floor, that everything was about to change. My hands were shaking. Not from age, though Lord knows Rebecca would say otherwise. From rage. Pure white-hot fury that had been building for 3 months, ever since she'd looked at my Singer sewing machine like it was a diseased animal and said those words that still echo in my head every night before I sleep. Selma, honestly, when are you going to stop playing dress-up with that ancient contraption and join the real world? The basement air was thick with dust motes dancing in the single beam of afternoon light that managed to sneak through the grimy window. I could smell the mustiness of old fabric, the sharp bite of machine oil, and something else, something metallic that might have been my own blood from where I'd pricked my finger on a pin earlier. Everything felt heightened, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. I bent down to pick up the broken thread, my joints protesting, and that's when I heard it, footsteps above. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming toward the basement door. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The footsteps stopped right above my head. I froze, thread still dangling from my fingers, and listened. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then the basement door creaked open. Mom? You down there again with that old thing? Rebecca's voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected, half concern, half condescension, wrapped up in fake sweetness like poison in honey. I heard her heels clicking on the wooden steps, each click a tiny hammer blow to my skull. I'm here, I called back, not looking up from my machine. The Singer 401, my grandmother's machine, passed down through 3 generations of women who knew the value of creating something beautiful with their own hands. Rebecca wouldn't understand that if I drew her a diagram. She appeared in my peripheral vision, all designer jeans and perfectly blown-out hair, looking around my workspace like she'd stepped into a tomb. Which, I suppose, she had. This was where dreams came to die, according to her. Where old women went to pretend they still mattered. The ladies upstairs are asking about dessert, she said, but her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the fabric scattered across my cutting table, the half-finished garments hanging from the ceiling pipes, the sketches pinned to the corkboard on the wall. What is all this? I followed her gaze to the centerpiece, a gown that had taken me 6 weeks to create. Midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb light and give it back as something richer, deeper. Hand-sewn beadwork that caught the basement's dim light and threw it back in tiny diamonds. A neckline that would make a woman feel like a queen and a silhouette that could hide any flaw while highlighting every strength. It was my masterpiece. And Rebecca was looking at it like it was a Halloween costume from a discount store. Just some sewing, I said quietly. She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound bounced off the concrete walls and came back sharper, meaner. Sewing? Selma, this looks like you're trying to start your own little sweatshop down here. Don't you think it's time to find a hobby more appropriate for your age? The rage I'd been carrying around for months suddenly crystallized into something harder, colder. I set down the broken thread and turned to face her fully. Appropriate for my age? I just mean, she gestured vaguely at the machine, at the fabrics, at me. Wouldn't you be happier upstairs with the other ladies? Playing bridge or watching the Food Network or something? This just seems so intense for someone who should be relaxing and enjoying retirement. Someone who should be relaxing. Someone who should be sitting in a rocking chair waiting to die, she meant. Someone who should know her place. What if I told you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside my chest, that this old sewing machine and these scraps of fabric could do something your fancy job in marketing never could? Rebecca's smile faltered for just a second. Like what? Like create something that would stop traffic. Something that would make people remember that beauty doesn't come from a computer screen or a corporate boardroom. Something that would prove that experience and skill matter more than youth and arrogance. The smile was back, but now it had edges. Oh, Mom. That's really sweet. But come on. Look around you. Look at this place. She gestured again, encompassing the basement, the machine, me. This isn't a fashion house. This is a basement hobby that's gotten a little out of hand. No one cares about homemade clothes anymore. Everything's mass-produced now, and honestly, it looks better. I stood up slowly, my bones creaking like old floorboards. Rebecca took an instinctive step back, which surprised both of us. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, not fear exactly, but a recognition that maybe she'd pushed too far. "You know what, Rebecca?" I said, my voice so calm it scared me. "You're absolutely right. No one cares about homemade clothes anymore." She relaxed, thinking she'd won. "I'm glad you see that. Maybe we can clean all this out, turn it into a proper rec room or something. Jason's been wanting a place to watch his games without bothering anyone." "But," I continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "what if someone did care? What if there was a place where handmade still mattered? Where craftsmanship still meant something?" "Like where?" She was humoring me now, checking her phone, probably calculating how long this conversation would take so she could get back to her friends upstairs. "Like the Riverside Fashion Showcase next month." That got her attention. Her head snapped up from her phone, eyes wide. "The what?" "The annual fashion show at the Riverside Community Center. Local designers, handmade pieces, judged by real fashion professionals from the city. Winner gets their work featured in Metropolitan Style magazine and a $5,000 prize." I hadn't planned to tell her. Hell, I hadn't even decided if I was going to enter until the words left my mouth. But seeing her expression, that perfect mix of shock and disbelief, made the decision for me. "You're kidding," she said. "You're not seriously thinking of entering some amateur fashion show with that?" She pointed at my gown like it was roadkill. "Why not?" "Because..." She sputtered, looking around the basement again as if the walls might help her find the right words. "Because you're 72 years old. Because you haven't made anything besides quilts and pot holders in decades. Because that machine is older than I am. Because..." "Because what, Rebecca? Because I'm too old to dream? Too old to create? Too old to prove that I still have something to offer the world?" The silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. Metallic, like copper pennies or blood. Rebecca stood there, mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in her hand, staring at me like I'd just declared my intention to join the circus. Finally, she laughed again. But this time it was different. Forced. Nervous. Okay, fine. You want to embarrass yourself at some community center fashion show, go ahead. Just, don't tell anyone you're my mother-in-law, okay? I have a reputation to maintain." She turned to leave, then paused on the third step and looked back. "And Selma? When this little fantasy doesn't work out the way you think it will, I hope you'll finally be ready to have a real conversation about what to do with all this stuff." Her heels clicked back up the stairs, each step echoing like a countdown. The basement door closed with a soft thud, and I was alone again with my machine, my fabrics, and my rage. I picked up the broken silk thread and examined it. Snapped clean through, but the fiber was still strong. Still had life in it. Still had uses. Just like me. I threaded my needle with steady hands and returned to my work. The midnight blue gown hung before me like a challenge, like a promise, like a weapon I was forging one stitch at a time. Every bead I sewed caught the dim light and threw it back brighter. Every seam I reinforced made the garment stronger. Every hour I spent in that basement was an hour spent preparing for war. Because that's what this was now. War. Rebecca had drawn the battle lines, and I was going to meet her on the battlefield she'd chosen. She thought my age made me weak, my hobby made me irrelevant, my dreams made me foolish. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of silk and satin, of staying up until 3 in the morning perfecting a hemline, of pricking my fingers on pins until they were more bandage than flesh. I told no one about the fashion show. Not Jason, my sweet son who always tried to keep the peace between his wife and his mother. Not my neighbors, who might have offered encouragement or advice I wasn't ready to hear. Not even Martha from down the street, who'd been my closest friend since we were both young mothers with babies and dreams we thought we'd given up. I worked in secret, in silence, in the growing certainty that I was creating something extraordinary. The gown evolved. What had started as a simple evening dress became something more, a statement piece that seemed to capture light and shadow in equal measure, that moved like water but caught the eye like fire. The beadwork alone took 60 hours, each bead placed with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. The silk lining felt like cool air against skin. The silhouette would make any woman look like royalty. It was, without question, the best thing I had ever created. But as the date of the fashion show approached, doubt began to creep in like cold air through a cracked window. What if Rebecca was right? What if I was just a foolish old woman playing dress-up in her basement? What if my work looked amateur compared to the other entries? What if? The phone rang on a Tuesday evening, 2 days before the show. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it was another telemarketer or political campaign, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Mrs. Whitaker? This is Jennifer Chun from the Riverside Fashion Showcase Committee. My heart stopped. They were calling to tell me they'd made a mistake, that entries from women my age weren't welcome, that I should stick to quilting bees and church socials. I'm calling because we've had to make some last-minute changes to the show format, she continued, her voice professionally cheerful. We've had an overwhelming response this year, so we're adding a special category for heritage craftsmanship, pieces that showcase traditional techniques and timeless design. Okay, I managed. Your entry has been selected for this category, and I have to tell you, the preview photos you submitted are absolutely stunning. The judges are very excited to see the actual garment. The judges were excited to see my work. The work Rebecca had called a basement hobby that had gotten out of hand. Mrs. Whitaker, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Wonderful. We'll need you here by 5 p.m. on Thursday for the final fitting and staging. The show starts at 7, and the heritage category will be featured in the second half. You'll want to bring whoever will be modeling the piece. Do you have someone in mind? I hadn't even thought about a model. In all my focus on creating the perfect gown, I'd somehow overlooked the small detail of finding someone to wear it. The form I'd used for construction was my size, but the show would require a live model, someone who could bring the garment to life on the runway. I'll figure something out, I said. Great. We're looking forward to seeing you Thursday. And Mrs. Whitaker? Based on those photos, I think you're going to surprise a lot of people. She hung up, leaving me standing in my basement with the phone in my hand and a gown that suddenly felt like both the best and worst decision I'd ever made. 2 days. I had 2 days to find a model and somehow work up the courage to put my work in front of judges who would either validate everything I'd been feeling or confirm Rebecca's assessment that I was a foolish old woman with delusions of grandeur. I hung up the phone and looked at my gown, hanging there in the basement light like a promise waiting to be kept. The beadwork sparkled. The silk seemed to move even in the still air. It was beautiful. I knew it was beautiful. But would anyone else see it the way I did? Thursday morning dawned gray and threatening, with the kind of heavy clouds that promised rain by evening. I stood at my basement window, watching the sky and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building in my chest like steam in a kettle. I still didn't have a model. Martha had volunteered when I'd finally broken down and told her about the show, but she was 2 sizes smaller than the gown and afraid of heights, which included the 6-inch runway platform. My neighbor's daughter was the right size but had to work. The woman from my church who'd seemed interested had gotten cold feet and cancelled the night before. Which left me with exactly one option, and I wasn't sure I had the nerve to ask. But at noon, with 4 hours until I had to leave for the venue, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but rarely used. Rebecca? It's Selma. I need to ask you something. The fashion show was in 3 hours, and I was about to do something that would either redeem everything I'd worked for or destroy what little relationship I had left with my daughter-in-law. But first, I had to tell her about the call I'd received that morning. The call that changed everything. The call that meant tonight wasn't just about proving myself anymore. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. I could hear Rebecca breathing, could almost see her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against whatever surface she was leaning on, calculating the social cost of whatever I was about to ask. What kind of something? She finally said, her voice carefully neutral. I closed my eyes and took a breath that tasted like basement dust and my grandmother's lavender sachets. I need a model for tonight. Someone about your size. Someone who can walk in heels and isn't afraid of being looked at. Another pause. Then tonight. The fashion show. The one you said would embarrass me. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I need someone to wear the gown. She laughed, but it wasn't the sharp, cutting sound from 3 weeks ago. This one was different, surprised, maybe even a little impressed. You actually entered that thing? I actually did. And they accepted it? They put it in a special category. Heritage craftsmanship. I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice, didn't even try. The judges are excited to see it. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Thoughtful instead of dismissive. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and waited, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat mixing with the distant hum of her breathing. "What time?" she asked finally. Hope fluttered in my chest like a bird trying to escape a cage. "We need to be there by 5 for fitting and staging. The show starts at 7. "I can't." The words came out fast, almost relieved. "I have plans tonight. Dinner with clients from the Morrison account. It's been scheduled for weeks." Of course she did. Of course there was something more important than helping the foolish old woman who'd raised the son she loved. I should have expected it. Should have prepared for it. "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood perfectly. "But Selma." Her voice changed again, softer now, almost hesitant. "Is it really that good? The dress?" I looked at the gown hanging in front of me, the way the afternoon light caught the beadwork and made it sparkle like stars against deep water. The way the silk fell in perfect lines that would flatter any figure. The way every stitch represented hours of work, decades of skill, a lifetime of dreams that had never quite died. "Yes," I said simply. "It is." Another pause. Then shit. I blinked. Rebecca never cursed around me. Never let her professional mask slip enough to show what she was really thinking. "What?" "The Morrison account can wait. They're boring anyway, and their idea of fine dining is Olive Garden." I could hear her moving around, probably already planning her outfit, her makeup, her strategy for the evening. "What time did you say we need to be there?" The bird in my chest spread its wings. 5 o'clock. "I'll pick you up at 4:30. And Selma?" "This dress better be everything you say it is, because if I'm walking down a runway in some basement creation that looks like a prom dress from 1987, I will never forgive you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my basement with tears threatening to spill over and a daughter-in-law who had just surprised me more than I thought possible. 4 hours. I had 4 hours to transform myself from a basement seamstress into someone who belonged at a fashion show. 4 hours to figure out how to present my work without my knees shaking or my voice cracking. 4 hours to prepare for the possibility that everything I'd worked for might crumble under the bright lights and critical eyes of people who knew fashion better than I ever would. I started with a shower, washing away 3 weeks of fabric dust and machine oil and nervous sweat. Then I stood in front of my bedroom closet, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed impossibly frumpy and old-fashioned. What did one wear to watch one's own creation walk down a runway? What was appropriate for someone who might be about to achieve the dream of a lifetime or face the humiliation of public failure? In the end, I chose my black wool dress, the one I'd worn to Jason's graduation, to his wedding, to every important event where I needed to look respectable but not attention-grabbing. I paired it with my grandmother's pearl necklace and the small diamond earrings my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary. Simple. Classic. Safe. At 4:15, I was standing by my front window, purse in hand, watching for Rebecca's silver BMW. My palms were sweating despite the cool October air, and I kept checking my phone to make sure I hadn't missed any calls from the venue. What if they'd changed their minds? What if there was some mistake? What if? The BMW pulled into my driveway with the quiet purr of German engineering and monthly payments that probably cost more than my grocery budget. Rebecca got out wearing a black wrap dress that probably cost more than my monthly social security check, her hair swept into a sophisticated updo that looked effortless but had probably taken an hour to perfect. She looked like someone who belonged at fashion shows. Someone who understood the language of style and design and knew how to navigate social situations where reputations were made and destroyed with a glance. I looked like someone's grandmother. But when she saw me through the window, she smiled. Not her usual polite, measured smile, but something real and warm and almost nervous. "You ready for this?" she asked as I settled into the passenger seat that still smelled like new leather and expensive perfume. "No," I said honestly. "But I don't think I ever will be, so we might as well go." She laughed, and for the first time since I'd known her, it sounded genuine. "Fair enough. So tell me about this dress. What makes it special?" As we drove through the familiar streets toward the community center, I found myself talking about techniques and design choices, about the way certain fabrics catch light and how hand-sewn beadwork differs from machine applications. Rebecca asked questions, real questions, not the polite, dismissive ones she usually offered when forced to engage with my hobbies. How long did the beadwork take? She wanted to know. About 60 hours. Each bead is sewn individually, positioned to catch the light from multiple angles. And the pattern? Did you design that yourself? I adapted it from a Victorian morning dress I saw in a museum. But I changed the color scheme and added elements that would work better with the silhouette I wanted. She was quiet for a moment, navigating a turn with the kind of precision that suggested she was thinking about more than just driving. I had no idea, she said finally. I mean, I knew you sewed, but I thought it was just, simple stuff. Practical stuff. Most people think that. I watched the community center come into view, its parking lot already half full with cars belonging to people who understood fashion in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. That's why tonight matters so much. Rebecca parked near the main entrance and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. Could feel the weight of 3 weeks' worth of work and a lifetime's worth of dreams pressing down on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Selma, Rebecca said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Before we go in there, I need to tell you something. My stomach clenched. This was where she'd change her mind, where she'd explain that walking down a runway in front of fashion professionals wasn't something she could risk, where she'd apologize but suggest I find someone else, someone who didn't have a career to protect. What? 3 weeks ago, when I found you in the basement, I was. She paused, looking out at the community center like it might offer her the right words. I was scared. Scared. Of what you represented. This woman who'd lived this full life, who'd raised children and buried a husband and survived things I can't even imagine, and she was still down there creating things. Still dreaming. Still believing she had something important to offer. Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. And here I am, 38 years old, and the most creative thing I do is design PowerPoint presentations for clients who sell widgets. I stared at her profile, this woman I'd thought I knew, this woman I'd assumed looked down on me and everything I represented. I told myself you were wasting your time because I was jealous, she continued. Because you had this passion, this thing that made you light up, and I had meetings. And spreadsheets. And a job that pays well but doesn't mean anything. Rebecca. Let me finish. She turned to face me, and I saw tears threatening at the corners of her carefully made-up eyes. When you told me about the fashion show, my first instinct was to talk you out of it. To protect you from disappointment, I told myself. But really? I was protecting myself from having to watch you succeed at something that mattered when I'd convinced myself that success only comes in the form of salary increases and corner offices. The parking lot was filling up around us, people in clothes that cost more than my monthly budget walking toward a building where my work would either be celebrated or dismissed. But right now, all I could focus on was this conversation I'd never expected to have with this woman I'd never really understood. So when you asked me to model your dress, she said, I realized I had a choice. I could stick with my safe dinner plans and my safe life and my safe assumptions about what matters. Or I could take a risk on someone who's never stopped taking risks, someone who's still brave enough to dream at 72. I reached over and took her hand, surprised by how cold her fingers were. And I'd rather be brave with you than safe without you. We sat there for a moment, two women who'd spent 3 years misunderstanding each other, finally seeing clearly. Then Rebecca squeezed my hand and checked her reflection in the rear-view mirror. Okay, she said, her professional mask sliding back into place but somehow warmer than before. Let's go show these people what heritage craftsmanship looks like. The community center buzzed with controlled chaos. Models in various stages of dress and undress moved between makeshift dressing areas, their clothes covered by garment bags that promised everything from avant-garde sculptural pieces to elegant evening wear. Designers clustered around clothing racks, making last-minute adjustments and nervously checking their phones. The air smelled like hairspray and coffee and the particular brand of anxiety that comes with putting creative work in front of strangers who might judge it harshly. Jennifer Chun spotted us immediately, her clipboard and headset marking her as someone in charge. She was younger than I'd expected from her phone voice, probably in her early 30s, with a kind of confident energy that comes from successfully managing controlled chaos. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm so glad you're here. And this must be your model. She looked Rebecca up and down with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years evaluating how clothes would look on different body types. Perfect. The dress is going to look stunning on you. Rebecca smiled, but I caught the slight tension in her shoulders. She was nervous too, I realized. This was as much a risk for her as it was for me. "Where can we do the fitting?" I asked. Jennifer led us to a corner of the main hall that had been sectioned off with portable screens. "You'll have privacy here for the fitting, and there's a full-length mirror. The dress is hanging right there," she pointed to a garment bag hanging from a portable rack. "And oh my goodness, even covered up it looks incredible." She hurried off to manage some crisis involving a missing belt, leaving Rebecca and me alone with the bag that contained 3 weeks of work and a lifetime of dreams. "You ready for this?" I asked, echoing her earlier question. Rebecca was staring at the garment bag like it might contain either treasure or disaster. "What if it doesn't fit? What if I trip? What if it's perfect?" I unzipped the bag slowly, revealing my midnight blue creation inch by inch. The beadwork caught the overhead lights and threw them back in tiny rainbows. The silk seemed to move even while hanging still. Rebecca gasped, and reached out to touch the fabric with the kind of reverence usually reserved for museum pieces. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Selma, this is extraordinary." Hearing her say those words, seeing the genuine amazement in her eyes, I felt something shift inside my chest. The fear that had been building for weeks didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Not confidence exactly, but a quiet certainty that whatever happened tonight, I had created something worthy of respect. "Help me get it off the hanger," I said. The fitting took 20 minutes of careful adjustments and strategic pinning. The dress fit Rebecca like it had been made for her, which in a way it had. I'd been unconsciously designing for someone with her build, someone tall and elegant who could carry the drama of the silhouette without being overwhelmed by it. When she finally turned to face the mirror, we both fell silent. The woman looking back at us wasn't the Rebecca I'd known for 3 years. This Rebecca moved like royalty, carried herself like someone who belonged in designer gowns and magazine spreads. The dress transformed her in ways that had nothing to do with fabric or beading and everything to do with how she saw herself while wearing it. "I look..." She started, then stopped, her voice catching. "Beautiful," I finished. "You look absolutely beautiful." "No," she said, turning to face me with tears in her eyes. "I look like I matter. Like what I do matters. Like I'm worth paying attention to." Before I could respond, Jennifer appeared at the edge of our makeshift dressing area, clipboard in hand and stress written across her face. "Mrs. Whittaker? I need to speak with you privately. There's been a development." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Rebecca and I exchanged glances, and I saw my own fear reflected in her eyes. This was where they told us there'd been a mistake, where they explained that my entry wasn't appropriate, where they asked us to leave quietly so as not to cause a scene. "What kind of development?" Rebecca asked, her voice carrying the authority she used in business meetings. Jennifer looked around nervously, then stepped closer and lowered her voice. "One of our judges is Marianne Foster from Metropolitan Style magazine. She saw the preview photos of your dress and, well, she's very interested in featuring heritage craftsmanship in their spring issue. She specifically asked to meet with whoever created this piece." My heart stopped. Metropolitan Style wasn't just any fashion magazine, it was the magazine. The one that discovered new designers, launched careers, set trends that rippled through the industry for years. "She wants to meet with me?" "After the show. She's hoping to discuss not just this piece but your background, your techniques, maybe commission some pieces for their spread on American craftsmanship." Jennifer's eyes were bright with excitement. "Mrs. Whittaker, do you understand what this means? This could change everything for you." I understood. I understood that everything I'd dreamed about in my basement while Rebecca dismissed my work as a hobby was suddenly, impossibly, within reach. I understood that the woman who'd called my sewing machine an ancient contraption was about to walk down a runway wearing proof that experience and skill could still matter in a world obsessed with youth and mass production. I understood that in 2 hours, my life might be completely different. But first, we had to survive the show. "Places, everyone." Someone called from the main area. "Heritage craftsmanship models, you're up after the avant-garde section. 20 minutes. Rebecca squeezed my hand, her fingers steady now despite the magnitude of what we were facing. "Whatever happens out there," she said, "I'm proud to be wearing your work. I'm proud to be part of this." I squeezed back, feeling the weight of 3 weeks of preparation and 3 years of misunderstanding settling on my shoulders like my grandmother's shawl, familiar, comforting, and strong enough to carry me through whatever came next. "Let's go show them what we're made of," I said. But as we walked toward the staging area, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A woman in an expensive suit, talking animatedly to one of the judges, pointing in our direction with a kind of aggressive gestures that suggested she wasn't offering compliments. A woman I recognized. A woman who had every reason to want my entry to fail spectacularly. A woman whose presence here could only mean one thing: tonight wasn't just about proving myself anymore. Tonight had become about survival. The woman in the expensive suit turned, and I found myself staring into the cold eyes of Patricia Ashford, the fashion buyer who'd humiliated me at Nordstrom 15 years ago when I tried to sell my designs. The woman who'd looked at my portfolio like it was contaminated and told me that amateur seamstresses had no place in real fashion. She was older now, her blonde hair more silver than gold, but her expression was exactly the same, dismissive, superior, and utterly convinced of her own importance. When she saw me, her lips curved into a smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "Selma Whitaker," she said, walking toward us with the measured steps of a predator. "I heard you were displaying here tonight. How quaint." Rebecca stepped slightly in front of me, her posture shifting into the protective stance she used in hostile business meetings. "And you are?" "Patricia Ashford, senior fashion consultant for several major department store chains. I've known Selma for years." The word known dripped with condescension. I was just telling the judges about her history with fashion. My mouth went dry. Whatever she'd told them, it wasn't good. I could see it in the way Judge Martinez was looking at me now, not with the excitement Jennifer had described, but with the polite skepticism reserved for people who'd oversold themselves. "What history?" Rebecca's voice could have cut glass. Patricia's smile widened. "Oh, just that Selma tried to break into fashion years ago with some lovely little house dresses. Very domestic. I'm sure she's improved since then, but you understand how important it is to maintain standards in a showcase like this." The words hit me like physical blows. Lovely little house dresses. Domestic. Standards. Each one designed to remind me, and everyone listening, that I was an amateur playing in a professional world. "Actually," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of managing difficult clients, "what's important is recognizing true craftsmanship when you see it. Which, apparently, some people struggle with." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me." Rebecca stepped forward, the midnight blue gown moving around her like liquid starlight. "You look at this dress, really look at it, and tell me it's amateur work. Tell me those hand-sewn beads are domestic. Tell me that silhouette doesn't rival anything in your precious department stores." For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia seemed uncertain. Her eyes flickered over Rebecca's dress, taking in details she'd probably missed before, the precision of the beadwork, the way the silk caught and held light, the mathematical perfection of the construction. "It's adequate," she said finally. "But fashion is about more than technical skill. It's about vision, about understanding what modern women want." "What modern women want," Rebecca interrupted, "is to feel beautiful. To feel powerful. To wear something that was made with care and attention instead of churned out by machines in factories where no one knows their name." She gestured to the dress she wore. "This was made by someone who understands that fashion isn't just about following trends. It's about creating something timeless." The staging area had gone quiet around us. Other models, designers, and volunteers had stopped their preparations to listen to this impromptu fashion debate. I could feel their eyes on us, waiting to see who would win this battle of words and wills. 5 minutes to heritage craftsmanship," someone called, breaking the tension. Patricia straightened her suit jacket. "Well, I suppose we'll see what the judges think." She walked away, but not before giving me one last look that promised this wasn't over. Rebecca turned to me, her face flushed with anger and adrenaline. "Who the hell was that?" I told her quickly about Patricia, about the portfolio rejection, about 15 years of carrying those words like stones in my chest. Rebecca listened with growing fury, her hands clenching into fists that would have ruined her manicure if she'd noticed. "That woman," she said when I finished, "is about to eat her words. Rebecca, you don't understand. If she's poisoned the judges against me, then we'll change their minds." Rebecca grabbed my hands, her fingers warm and steady. Selma, look at me. Do you believe in this dress? Yes. Do you believe it's the best work you've ever done? Yes. Then that's all that matters. Everything else is just noise. Heritage craftsmanship models, you're up. This was it. 3 weeks of work, a lifetime of dreams, and Patricia Ashford's attempts at sabotage all coming down to the next 10 minutes. Rebecca squeezed my hands one last time, then walked toward the staging area with the kind of confidence I'd only seen in professional models. I found a spot near the runway where I could watch, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice filled the space. Ladies and gentlemen, our Heritage Craftsmanship category celebrates the timeless art of traditional construction techniques and classic design principles. These pieces represent not just clothing, but wearable art that honors the skills passed down through generations. The first model appeared, a young woman in a beautifully tailored suit that looked like it belonged in a 1940s movie. The audience murmured appreciation as she walked, turned, and walked back. Professional. Competent. Safe. The second piece was a hand-knitted sweater dress in natural wool, worn by a woman in her 50s, who moved like she was more comfortable behind a knitting needle than on a runway. It was lovely work, but it looked exactly like what Patricia had called it, domestic. Then the lights shifted, and Rebecca stepped into view. The audience fell silent. She moved like she'd been walking runways her entire life, each step deliberate and graceful. The midnight blue silk flowed around her like water, catching the lights and throwing them back in patterns that seemed to shift and change with every movement. The beadwork sparkled like stars against the deep fabric, creating depth and dimension that made the dress look almost alive. But it wasn't just the dress. It was Rebecca. The woman who'd spent 3 years convinced that corporate success was the only kind that mattered had transformed into someone who understood that sometimes, power came from beauty. Sometimes, strength came from elegance. Sometimes, the most important thing you could do was remind people that craftsmanship still mattered in a world that had forgotten how to value the work of human hands. She reached the end of the runway and paused, turning slowly so the judges could see every angle, every detail, every hour of work that had gone into creating this moment. Then she walked back, and the silence followed her like a wake. When she disappeared backstage, the applause started. Not the polite, measured clapping of fashion show etiquette, but real appreciation. The kind of response reserved for pieces that made people remember why they'd fallen in love with fashion in the first place. I stood there, tears running down my cheeks, watching strangers applaud work I'd created in my basement with a sewing machine older than most of them. Watching Patricia Ashford's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been respect. Watching everything I'd dreamed about for 15 years finally, impossibly, come true. Mrs. Whittaker? I turned to find Marianne Foster, the editor for Metropolitan Style, standing beside me with a smile that could have powered the entire community center. I don't think I've ever seen heritage craftsmanship presented quite like that, she said. Would you mind if we talked? 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a quiet corner of the lobby with Marianne, Rebecca, and a recording app on a phone, trying to process what was happening. The editor wanted to feature my work in their spring issue. Not just the dress, but a full spread on the new heritage movement, designers who combine traditional techniques with contemporary vision. What you've created, Marianne was saying, represents something we're seeing more of in fashion. People are hungry for authenticity, for pieces that have stories, for clothes that connect them to something bigger than just trends. I nodded, trying to look professional while my mind reeled with possibilities I'd never dared consider. Magazine features. Commission work. The chance to prove that Patricia Ashford had been wrong about everything. But what I really want to know, Marianne continued, is what's next. This dress is clearly not a one-off. What else are you working on? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because standing across the lobby, watching our conversation with undisguised amazement, was Patricia Ashford. She was holding her phone, probably trying to figure out how to spin this development to her department store contacts. But for once, I didn't care what Patricia thought or said or did. I had Rebecca beside me, wearing my creation like armor. I had a magazine editor asking about my future work. I had proof that dreams didn't have expiration dates, that skill and passion could triumph over prejudice and ageism, that sometimes the best revenge was simply refusing to give up. What's next, I said, my voice steady and sure, is everything I've been preparing for my entire life. 6 months later, I stood in my transformed basement, no longer a dark space where dreams went to die, but a proper design studio with professional lighting, cutting tables, and a new industrial sewing machine that hummed with quiet efficiency. The old singer still held a place of honor, but now it was accompanied by tools that could handle the volume of work that had been pouring in since the magazine feature ran. Rebecca knocked on the studio door, then appeared at the top of the stairs wearing one of my new designs, a day dress in forest green silk that we'd collaborated on, combining her eye for modern lines with my understanding of construction and fit. "The photographer from Vogue is here," she said. "Are you ready?" I looked around the studio, at the half-finished garments hanging from every available surface, at the sketches pinned to design boards, at the evidence of a creative life that had finally found its proper expression. Through the window, I could see Patricia Ashford's car pulling up outside. She'd become one of my most enthusiastic buyers once the fashion press had proclaimed my work revolutionary heritage design. Some people might call that poetic justice. I prefer to think of it as proof that talent, persistence, and the support of people who believed in you could overcome any amount of prejudice or dismissal. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. Sometimes, it's discovering that the dreams you thought you'd given up were just waiting for the right moment to bloom. Sometimes, it's learning that it's never too late to become exactly who you were meant to be.